Imagine walking through the streets of Boston on a cold January afternoon in 1919. Horse carts move slowly over the cobblestone roads. Children laugh as they play outside. Workers hurry home after another long day. Everything feels perfectly normal until the ground begins to shake. At first, people think it's a small earthquake. Then comes a deep metallic groan, so loud it echoes through the entire neighborhood. In the next second, a gigantic steel tank suddenly bursts apart. But this isn't filled with water or oil. It's filled with molasses. More than 2 million gallons of thick, sticky molasses explode into the streets, creating a wave over 25 feet high. The dark flood races through Boston faster than most people can run. Buildings collapse. Horse carts are thrown through the air. Families become trapped in the sticky liquid. Within moments, an ordinary afternoon turns into one of the strangest disasters in American history. How could something as harmless as molasses become so deadly? Why did engineers ignore the warning signs? And how did this disaster change construction laws across the United States forever? This is the incredible true story of the Boston Molasses Disaster. A tragedy so unbelievable that many people still think it sounds like fiction. Welcome to HistoryNova. Today, we're traveling back more than 100 years to uncover every detail behind one of America's most bizarre and unforgettable catastrophes. To understand how this unbelievable disaster happened, we first need to travel back to Boston in the early 1900s. The year was 1919. World War I had just ended, and America was changing rapidly. Factories were working around the clock, producing everything from food to industrial supplies. One product was especially valuable: molasses. Molasses is a thick, dark syrup made during the process of refining sugar. At the time, it wasn't just used in baking. It was also a key ingredient for making industrial alcohol, which was used in explosives, medicines, and military supplies. Because demand was so high, companies needed enormous storage tanks. One company, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, built a massive steel tank in Boston's North End. The tank stood nearly 50 feet tall and measured about 90 feet across. It was large enough to hold over 2 million gallons of molasses. To local residents, it looked like a giant metal monster towering over their neighborhood. Families lived only a few steps away. Children played nearby every day. Workers walked past it on their way to work. No one imagined that this giant structure could suddenly become a deadly weapon. But almost from the very beginning, people noticed something was wrong. The tank constantly made strange noises. Residents described loud creaks, groans, and metallic popping sounds. Some even joked that the tank was talking. Then something even more alarming happened. Dark molasses began leaking from the steel walls. Not just a few drops, but enough that neighborhood children would sometimes collect the sweet syrup in small containers. Instead of fixing the problem properly, workers simply painted the tank brown so the leaks would be harder to see. The warning signs were right in front of everyone. Yet, production continued. Every week, more and more molasses was pumped into the already stressed tank. With each delivery, the pressure inside increased. The steel walls bent ever so slightly. The rivets strained under the enormous weight, and no one knew that the countdown to disaster had already begun. Then came January 15th, 1919. Boston woke up to an unusually warm winter day. Fresh shipments of molasses had recently been added to the tank. Inside, pressure continued to rise. At around 12:30 in the afternoon, workers and local residents were going about their normal routines. Some were eating lunch. Some were loading horse carts. Children laughed in nearby streets. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Then, a loud metallic crack echoed across the neighborhood. Within seconds, the impossible happened. The entire steel tank ripped apart. Millions of gallons of thick molasses exploded into the streets with unbelievable force, and Boston would never be the same again. Without warning, a deafening roar echoed through Boston's North End. Witnesses later said it sounded like a machine gun, mixed with an explosion. The giant steel tank finally gave up. Thousands of steel rivets snapped apart. Massive metal plates were ripped into the air like paper. Then, more than 2.3 million gallons of molasses burst free in a single instant. A gigantic wave of thick, dark syrup surged through the streets. The wave reached an estimated height of 25 feet, moving at around 35 miles per hour. At first, people couldn't understand what they were seeing. It looked like a black wall swallowing everything in its path. Within seconds, horse carts disappeared beneath the sticky flood. Wooden buildings were smashed apart. Telephone poles snapped. Train tracks twisted under the tremendous force. People ran for their lives, but escaping wasn't easy. Unlike water, molasses is incredibly thick. With every step, victims sank deeper into the sticky liquid. Some became trapped within seconds. Others were pulled underwater and couldn't breathe. Parents desperately searched for their children. Workers screamed for help. Horses struggled to escape, but quickly became stuck. The streets turned into a nightmare. Windows shattered. Bricks flew through the air. Entire buildings collapsed. Even people several blocks away heard the terrifying sound. When the wave finally slowed, Boston's North End looked like a battlefield. The thick syrup covered streets, houses, wagons, and people. Everything was silent, except for cries for help. Police officers rushed to the scene. Firefighters arrived within minutes. Soon, sailors from nearby naval ships joined the rescue. But this wasn't a normal rescue mission. Every step sank into the sticky syrup. Rescuers became trapped themselves. They used ropes, wooden boards, and ladders to pull survivors free. Doctors worked nonstop. Hospitals quickly filled with injured victims. Many rescuers spent hours digging people out of the hardened molasses. As evening temperatures dropped, the syrup became even thicker. Rescue operations became even more difficult. It took several days before every victim could be found. The disaster claimed 21 lives. More than 150 people were injured. Some victims drowned. Others were crushed by collapsing buildings. Several died from severe injuries. The disaster didn't end after the rescue. Boston now faced another challenge: cleaning millions of gallons of sticky molasses. Workers sprayed huge amounts of salt water across the streets. Fire hoses ran day and night. Thousands of people helped remove the syrup. The cleanup lasted for weeks. Even after everything appeared clean, residents claimed they could still smell sweet molasses on hot summer days. According to local stories, the scent lingered for years. People demanded answers. How could such a massive tank suddenly explode? Engineers examined the broken steel. Their findings were shocking. The tank had been poorly designed. The steel plates were too thin. Many rivets were weak. Most importantly, the tank had never been properly tested before being filled. Even worse, workers had already reported leaks and strange noises months before the disaster. Instead of repairing the tank, the company simply painted it brown to hide the leaking molasses. Saving money had become more important than safety. The victims refused to stay silent. More than 100 families filed lawsuits. The legal battle lasted nearly 6 years. Finally, the court ruled that the company was responsible for the disaster. It was one of America's first major cases where engineers used scientific evidence to prove corporate negligence. The company was ordered to pay compensation to victims and their families. The tragedy also changed engineering standards across the United States. From that point forward, large industrial structures had to undergo much stricter inspections and safety testing before being put into service. Today, more than a century later, the Boston Molasses Disaster remains one of the strangest industrial accidents in history. It reminds us that even something as ordinary as molasses can become deadly when safety is ignored. Behind every engineering project lies a responsibility, not just to build something that works, but to build something that protects lives. 21 people never returned home that day. Their story deserves to be remembered, not because it was unusual, but because it changed history. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to discover more unbelievable true stories from history, subscribe to HistoryNova. Because history isn't just about the past, it's full of stories that still shape our world today. Thanks for watching.